you big strong man, Uncle Sam needs your help again. He's got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam. So put down your books and pick up a gun. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam.
The Vietnam War was the longest war in American history and lasted between 1954 and 1975. It was the most unpopular war of the 20th century. The purpose was to prevent the spread of communism, and it cost the United States about 58,000 lives and 350,000 casualties. There were 2 million Vietnamese deaths. As a result, the Congress enacted the War Powers Act in 1973.
We interviewed Ro Lindquist, who at the time during the Vietnam War was 22 years old, and she was living in Franklin Square, New York. She wasn't working or in school at the time. She had just gotten married to John Lindquist, who went and fought in Vietnam for 3 months. We chose to interview Ro because John, her husband, refuses to talk about his experiences in Vietnam, so we thought it would be interesting to speak with someone who was close to a soldier who served and lived during the time of the Vietnam War.
Many Americans then and now believe the war was unnecessary.
Uncle John did.
Your husband?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you know about his experience over there?
Just that it was awful, and, he lost a lot of friends while he was there, and he was lucky to get out alive.
Yeah. And besides, him telling you what was going on over there, what do you remember reading or seeing about the war in, the newspaper or on TV?
Well, that it was, very, what could I say, well, it's a war that shouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's, innocent soldiers were dying there, and, for no reason.
Began bombing Vietnam in 1965, anti-war attitudes increased. Many protests were led by student activists, such as the ones organized by Students for a Democratic Society. After 1967, nationwide strikes led by the SDS were commonplace. Students would sometimes protest by completely ignoring the draft and risking prosecution, or enlist in the National Guard or other reserves. Sometimes these protests turned violent. One of these included the siege of the Pentagon, where 100,000 anti-war demonstrators clashed with police and federal marshals. Hundreds of people were arrested and several demonstrators beaten.
Here are a few images displaying these protests. The bottom right is an image of the siege of the Pentagon.
The drafting method was a lottery process in which you were chosen based on your birthday. All draftees were between the ages 18 and 25, but people soon noticed that the lottery numbers were not distributed uniformly over the year. This led to complaints that the lottery was not random, as the legislation required. After how many years was Uncle John, your husband, over in Vietnam for?
He was actually there for 3 months.
3 months.
Okay, we got married in July of 65, and they sent him right over.
Okay.
And he was there for only 3 months because I was sick, and he ended up getting discharged on a hardship discharge.
Draft evasion is an intentional decision not to comply with the military conscription policies of one's nation. Those who practice draft evasion are sometimes projectively referred to as draft dodgers, a term which was made popular during the Vietnam War. Some examples of draft evasion are paying a stand-in to take one's place if drafted, claiming to be homosexual when the military question excludes homosexuals, This would be considered draft evasion if the claim was false, but if the potential soldier is in fact homosexual, rules would prevent him from enlisting even if he wished to do so. Seeking excusal from military service due to health reasons is also an example. However, this was fairly unpopular because many men were afraid to show signs of weakness. Also, moving out of the country was an example of draft evasion, often to Canada or Switzerland.
Draft avoidance is the elimination of a potential officer's military service obligation through some lawful procedure. One example of this was a sole surviving son, and one can request a discharge if they are a sole surviving son. This is someone who is the last living sibling of a family because the others were killed in combat. The military would discharge that individual immediately. A next example is a conscientious objection, and that is an individual who has claimed the right to refuse to perform military service on the grounds of freedom of thought, conscience, and/or religion. This was not always an easy route to take because it was very difficult to prove your beliefs were anti-war. And as Ro mentioned, her husband was discharged on a hardship discharge. This means it was a request of separation if their family or dependents are suffering severe financial, physical, or psychological problems. And the reason for this was because Ro had Crohn's disease. This is an inflammatory bowel disease that at the time was believed to be caused by stress, aggravation, and upsetment. According to her doctor, the continuation of these outside factors made her condition worse.
Could you describe how dramatically the war affected your life?
Well, it affected my life because, we got married and he had to go right over there. And like I said, I was sick, and the doctor said, I had what they call today Crohn's disease, and they said that was a person, who had, upsetment in their life, and, aggravation, and it was just very upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
And for a person that has Crohn's, they felt that, being upset was not good for my situation. So that's when they, my sister had gone to all kinds of people trying to the Red Cross, trying to get him out for my benefit, to make me well again, and of course for his benefit. But it took a while, but she succeeded.
How long did it take for him to come home?
I guess three months.
Okay.
He was there for 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And did your condition get any better when he came home?
Actually, it did. Mm-hmm.
It did? Okay, that's good.
Once coming back home, soldiers often have trouble adjusting to normal life. A few examples of these are post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury symptoms, soul damage, and a loss of identity.
And when he came home, what was he like afterwards?
In other words, he didn't come home the same person he left as.
Mm-hmm.
He came home much sadder. He had nightmares. He was like, didn't want anybody ever behind him because, over there you never trust anybody,
Mm-hmm.
He was very jumpy.
Mm-hmm. And did he ever talk about the war with you when he came home?
Yeah, he told me about friends that he, had lost. A grenade went off right next to him, and he lost one of his friends. And, it's a very, very sad, sad situation.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't part of our interview, but we later learned that John and one other soldier were the only survivors in their casualty due to the grenade. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, It's a type of anxiety disorder. It can occur after you have gone through an extreme emotional trauma that has involved the threat or injury of your life.
Although John hasn't been diagnosed, it is clear that by Rose's description he has displayed signs of the most common symptoms of PTSD. These include having nightmares, vivid memories, or flashbacks of the event, feeling anxious, jittery, or irritated, feeling upset by things that remind you of what happened, and having trouble sleeping or keeping your mind on one thing.
We've learned that almost everyone had and still has a negative view of the Vietnam War, that individuals not in combat directly were still deeply affected by the war. People would go to great extents risking their lives to avoid the draft, and that there are many different disorders brought on by the trauma.